Good afternoon. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. My name is Jose Cabañas. I am the president for the National Association of EMS Physicians, and welcome to this very special session for NAEMSP Town Hall in partnership with Prodigy EMS. As you all know, we do these occasional webinar town halls to sort of facilitate education, collaboration, and share new information that is relevant to our practice in our industry. But today is a very special session. As you all know, a very special physician, leader, colleague, mentor of many, recently passed away. And today we're going to take the time to have a conversation and share to honor him and his service that he dedicated for many years to our specialty. Dr. Ron Stewart, emergency physician who was instrumental in the foundation of EMS systems and EMS services across the country and also in Canada, recently passed away. And he was our founding president at NAEMSP. And today we are grateful to have with us together a amazing group of colleagues, friends who have been available to share a little bit about Ron. I will tell you that the impact that Dr. Stewart had in our industry is you can't quantify it, you can measure it. He was known as an exceptional physician, but also as a very compassionate physician leader. He was the first medical director within the Los Angeles Paramedic Education Program, where my understanding is he pretty much trained every clinician paramedic in that program. And we'll hear more about that today. Then later on, he moved to Pittsburgh, tremendous impact in the community of Pittsburgh, where we know a lot of uh, critical development of EMS occurred over the last 60 years. And from there, Ron moved to Canada, where he was an elected official, Minister of Health, and had consequential transformational changes in the EMS system. So we are grateful that we're here today to take the time to honor Ron and to have an amazing group of colleagues here to share about his impact in not only in their lives but also in the industry during his time. Today's webinar, it's we'll be getting CE credit, so you'll get more information about how to get that information and capture the CE credit. Feel free to put questions or comments in the chat or in the Q&A box. We'll be happy to answer those. And again, it's a great opportunity to learn about our history and learn about sort of instrumental figures that had a huge impact in our specialty. Just for knowledge, NAEMSP was founded in 1984. Ron was our first president. My understanding was that he became president because he went to the bathroom, and then when he came back, he was said, "You're the president for NAEMSP." And that organization today represents over 2,000 clinicians. And now we are sort of a leading organization moving forward our specialty. With that, I have a lot of great colleagues here. Before we do introductions, we want to start with a quick video to hear from Ron about his thoughts on EMS and about himself.
We need to realize that this field, as in all fields of medicine, is not stagnant. It is going to change. It changes and will change even more so as technology begins to influence it and as our knowledge of health and disease increases as well. So I would suspect that we need to look a little further down the road and imagine what will happen when we have the ability to intervene in unusual circumstances. I mean, if you were to tell me 10 years ago, maybe even more, that we would be giving anti-clotting medicines to people in the back of an ambulance as they zoom through the streets of Halifax in a suspected myocardial infarction. I mean, to suggest that at one point when this was introduced would be sacrilege. I mean, we just wouldn't want to risk that. I mean, we didn't, because we didn't know enough. But that's what we do. I mean, and I use that as a single example. But there are many other examples. The whole issue of blood loss in trauma, for example, has not been solved yet. I mean, there are new things happening, you know, and just recently I've read a couple of articles about this, that will change the practice that we do. So it comes back to research. It comes back to evaluation, which everything in medicine has to do that, so that we throw out the old and introduce the new, or at least we begin to learn about what works and what doesn't work. And we therefore have to have an active program that looks and to foster those who do this now. I mean, to foster the programs that do this, and whether it be through grants, through more funds available, through governmental or association funding. We are in the middle of the development. We're not at the end of the development of the specialty. We're just in the middle, if that. And so what we're going to be doing in a few years, which will not only be treatment-oriented, but preventive-oriented, prevention of worsening whatever we find in the field or whatever we find because a paramedic says, oh, we've got this, and so on and so on. It's an exciting time, and this is an exciting specialty to be in because of it.
Wow, thank you so much for that video, James, and for the team. So very powerful words from Ron, but I want to stop, and I'm just going to start bringing our friends or colleagues here who have been in a lot of ways known Ron for many years, but also worked with him many years. And I really, really, really welcome the conversation to reflect on Ron. So Bax, I'm going to look to you first. Sir, thanks so much for being here. And can you share a little bit from your perspective about Ron and his impact and his sort of work from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you very much, and allowing me. My name is Baxter Lorman. I go by Bax. I'm an emeritus professor at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. This looks strange. This is not a cutout that is beside me here. This is Randy Mantooth that will be speaking next. So I want to first thank NAEMSP and Prodigy for honoring our friend Ron. And just I think I'm starting because I may be the senior person in this group that has known Ron. I've had the pleasure to know Ron since 1973. That's 51 years. I was 19 years old when I met Ron. I was an EMT working in an emergency department where Ron was a junior resident at USC. And that one interaction is, and I think it's kind of amazing that in your life that you can go back and you can track one single event that changed your whole life. That one single event in 1973 is what changed my life. I'm going to try not to get emotional about this as best as I can, but you know, it is amazing that you can track that back. I mean, Ron was my really dear friend for 51 years. He was my mentor. And you know, we spent holidays together. He would come to my parents' house for holidays. We would travel around the United States together, and then around the world that we got to be able to do that as well. I got to go home and meet his family, mom, dad, and sister, that were always wonderful to be able to see. And he opened up opportunities for me that I would never have been able to have had on my own. And most important is he believed in me more than I believed in a 19-year-old. That was kind of amazing at the time, and always pushed me to do better. He made me, I believe, the educator that I am today and the researcher that I then became, thanks to him and a person by the name of Marv Birnbaum, that some of you may remember Marv as well. And, you know, the one thing that I feel probably the dearest thing that Ron gave to me was some lifetime relationships, two of which are on this screen. Walt has been a dear friend for, you know, for a long time, as well as Greg. And Ron used to call us the Three Amigos as well, which was always kind of fun. So to tell you a little bit about Ron in Los Angeles, you know, Ron was responsible for four paramedic training programs in Los Angeles at that time. And each one of those programs had 2 or 3 programs as well. So Ron was kept real busy at going around to all of these paramedic programs and making sure that they were doing all the things that were correct. And, you know, not only that, but I remember the most interesting was Nancy Caroline is credited to have the first textbook for advanced life support EMS. And I really think that Ron didn't get the credit that Ron did because Ron's was never published. Ron developed a 4-binder program that came out of Los Angeles that then went everywhere. He did it on an IBM Selectric typewriter. Now, you know, if you're not over 40, you don't even know what an IBM Selectric type, but it didn't even have an erase button. You had to kind of like put a piece of paper in there and all this kind of stuff to be able to do erase. And he did that. And then he drew his own hand characters and graphs when he did his textbook. And what's really cool is in the year 2000, Ron's 4-binder texts were made part of, and this guy was part of it as well, the Project 51 program. Ron's binders are now in the Smithsonian National Museum of American History, which is really a cool thing to be able to know. But more importantly, Ron, along with Michael Criley, were also the technical consultants for that show Emergency that was on television that this guy was involved with, and we'll talk a little bit more about. But, you know, that developed advanced life support throughout our country. And Randy's going to talk a little bit more about that. So, you know, there's hundreds of stories that people are going to be sharing, you know, one of which I think you're going to all find that everybody around here has one thing in common. And we've all had a paintbrush in our hand at some point with Ron. But the one thing that I wanted to do is that Ron came from a rural area of Nova Scotia and he comes to Los Angeles, and our freeway system is overbearing. I mean, it's really tough for somebody to be able to do. And I remember that Ron was at the hospital one day and we were going to go someplace together. And so we climb in Ron's car, and Ron knew how to get to the hospital. Getting away from the hospital was a difficult thing because he couldn't find the on-ramp around the hospital. So what Ron used to do is he'd go to the off-ramp that he used to get off, and he would back up the off-ramp to get onto the freeway when we would go. And I'm like, where did you learn? And he says, oh, I've been doing this for, 6 months now. And I was like, and then in passing, he goes, well, the other thing I have is I have a pilot's license. If you ever want to fly with me, I'd be glad. And it was like, yeah, I don't think so. My last story is really kind of fun as well, is that Ron was really a person that loved to be able to sail. He loved sailing, and I think he got that from Cape Breton. And one of the stories is we went over to Catalina Island, and Ron had a pretty good sized boat. It was a 41-foot ketch. That's not a small boat. So it was a big boat that Ron had. We went over to Catalina, we enjoyed ourselves, and then we were on our way back with a group of other people on the boat. And it was kind of getting to evening and dark. And rather than setting a course and using the compass, because it was compass only, they didn't have, Loran and GPS and all that kind of stuff then. So he goes ahead and he visually sees where we're going to go. So we go ahead and we take off, and we're heading to the shore, and we're about, 2 hours out, 3 hours out, and it doesn't seem to be getting any closer. And so we're all starting to wonder. It turns out that his land sighting was 80 miles south of where we needed to be able to go. So our 4-hour crossing from Catalina to Los Angeles on the sailboat took us it was a little over 12, maybe closer to 14 hours for us to be able to get back. But, one of the things that Ron, that I had seen for more than 20 years, 30 years maybe, was he always wanted to do a book. And that book morphed itself like 4 or 5 times on what he was going to actually do in the book. And then finally, it morphed into more of a, you know, a biography of his adventures in emergency medicine. And thank goodness, and I don't know if Mr. Meek, Jim Meek is on this call, but thanks goodness that Ron got to meet Jim, because Ron was able to make his real dream and his real passion come together with the thanks of Mr. Meek. And I personally believe that Ron survived as long as Ron did with the illness that Ron had, because Ron wanted to see his book be finished. And I think that was really something. So I'm going to just finish with Ron was my Morey. And I don't know if any of you read, you know, the book with Morey, but Ron was my Morey, and I miss him terribly. And I want to thank you guys so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Max, for sharing. You know, one of the things that I know that I think everybody here will share in some level is, you know, and you did already, it's the power of Ron's mentorship, not only through education, but his sort of fostering relationships and helping others sort of achieve their goals, their careers. So very powerful. Thanks for sharing. So Randy, take us into your sort of, I know you heavily involved with the show Emergency, which I have a lot of friends and colleagues that was instrumental in shaping their desire, passion, or energy towards this field. So can you share a little bit?
Sure. As far as the medical side is concerned, I'm going to just leave that up to you. You're all experts in what you do. But you know, when I first met him, I met him same year that Bax met him. I didn't know who he was. He was in the office, Bob Senator's office, along with a whole bunch of other people. And Bob Senator was not the nicest man in the world. He could be really rude and crude. So when I met him, Bob said, and I'm just a kid in the room, and filled with all these doctors and firefighters, and I, you know, I just want to keep a job. You know, that was the only thing that I was concerned with, and so he said, "Okay, kid, you're going to be studying with Ron Stewart." And I said, "Studying? Studying what?" And they said, "To be a paramedic." And I didn't really know what that meant, you know. And I said, "Yeah, okay, sure." Well, you know, that was like sipping water out of a fire hose. What they were asking me to do was just not look stupid when I was doing this stuff, that to know as much as I possibly could. Well, you know, I had 3, maybe 4 days to cram all this information, and you know, I was having a little difficulty, and he said, and Ron was so kind. He said, "I just don't want you to look uninformed and stupid in front of the camera. I want you to understand why you're doing this. What's the physicality behind it?" I said, "Okay." So he simplified it for me. And all of a sudden, I started my first IV. I was like, I actually stuck this guy, and I started an IV. Are you kidding? Well, I was then told I could do all these other things. And all of a sudden, it began to dawn on me that this was going to be a life-changing event. And I sort of never got over that feeling. It was like having a fever. that I couldn't, and an itch that I couldn't really get to. It's like I had to make a decision. Am I an actor or am I a paramedic? Well, I didn't want to do 13 weeks being a paramedic. I knew that acting, what I get paid as an actor and what I get paid as a firefighter and paramedic was going to be drastically different. But that feeling never left me. Even after the show, I was still attracted to being a firefighter, being a paramedic. And I think one of the personal things that I'd like to really get into was how childlike Ron was in his vast intellect. He still remained this child, always full of wonder. And I remember I was in Nova Scotia and he put me, he said, come on, I'm going to take you home with me and show you where I live. I said, okay, now I don't know whether you guys have been to his place up there in Nova Scotia or not. But as we were driving, we were getting deeper and deeper into the woods. And I thought, what an unlikely place for this guy to live. And we're in this little Volkswagen, and the little Volkswagen Bug, and he's driving without really looking at the road. And I was getting a little nervous about that. And then all of a sudden he takes off up into the woods on this dirt road, if you can call it that. And now I'm really confused. I didn't know where we were or what we were going to do. And he went up this road that I swear, and I'm a four-wheeler. I couldn't believe that he was driving up this road. And he says, oh, I got to hit this at the right angle. And he would bounce us all the way up. And believe me, I was working that brake on the right-hand side of the car. I mean, I almost put my foot through the floorboard. And we were bouncing. I didn't even know whether we were even buckled in or not, but I was holding on to whatever I could hold on to. And I said, good God, when you got there, I said, do you do this every night? And he goes, yeah. He said, that wasn't bad. It really gets bad in the winter. I was like, oh my God, how are we going to go back? Are we going to rappel back down? And we finally got into his house. I walked into the house, and there I saw, now this is, oh God, this is 10, 11 years ago. He has this huge television set. And I frankly had never seen a television set that big before. I probably haven't. My TV today is probably just as big, but I was really impressed with the TV. I went, whoa, wow. Geez, I don't think I've ever seen a television this big. And he said, yeah. I said, he said, so the guys put it in. And I said, I said, well, you mind if we turn it on so I can see the image? And he said, oh, I don't know how to turn it on. I said, you don't know how to turn it on? You've never had this on? No. Well, I don't understand. Why do you have it? And he said, well, they felt that I needed it, and so they put it up. And I said, I have never met anybody like Ron Stewart in my life. Again, it was this childlike innocence coupled with this massive, intelligent human being. And I was so impressed with him that he took me down to his lighthouse. He said he was going to pick the lighthouse up and put it over there. And I said, you're going to take this lighthouse, pick it up, and you're going to move it where? Well, he did. And I don't know whether it was this innocence that came out of him, that people trusted him. But all I know is that He was about the kindest, brightest human being I've ever met. And if Ron called and said, Randy, will you do this for me? I'd do it in a heartbeat. And I'm gonna miss Ron. And miss the conversations we would have. And anyway, I'm with Baxter. We talk about him all the time, and we really miss him. And I'm sure you all do too.
Yeah. Thanks so much, sir, for sharing. You know, I can tell. I think everybody here would, in some way, you along that special sort of class and group inspire so many people over the years to sort of build and evolve sort of the practice of EMS what it is today and some way to perform. So it's really is an honor, and thanks so much for sharing, because really I've heard so many times the stories of people feeling engaged, connected, and inspired by, not only the TV show or the program, but about the energy that was transmitted about changing people's lives and caring for them in a time of need. And that inspires so many people that have, evolved this specialty and evolved this practice. So thanks for sharing. So let's go to our dear friend Ron. So Ron, you have a different sort of phase, right, in connecting with Ron Stewart, and obviously you've been in Pixar for most of your career. So take us a little bit into that journey and share from perspective about sort of that time.
Yeah, thank you so much for including me in this town hall. I've known most of the people on this panel for 20 to 30 years. And Mr. Mantooth, we met a couple years ago when you were at a conference near Pittsburgh, and we chatted a bit about Ron Stewart. And after we were done chatting, my wife went back to get an autographed picture of you. So thanks for that picture. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about how I met Dr. Stewart and the impact he had on me. I know you threw me a softball. I loved the TV show Emergency. And at Penn State, I took an EMT course, and my plan was to become an emergency medicine physician. I knew absolutely nothing about emergency medicine. And at the time, there were very few emergency medicine docs. So my first role model was actually Kelly Brackett from the TV show Emergency. So whether it was dumb luck or divine intervention, I learned that Dr. Stewart, a real emergency medicine physician, was recruited to Pittsburgh. So in my first month of medical school in 1978, I went looking for the Center for Emergency Medicine. The center was actually in a student dormitory, and I thought I'd have trouble finding it, but the two glass doors front of the center had these giant letters, Center for Emergency Medicine, and there were all kinds of decals and arrows. At the time, I thought it was a bit overdone, but I learned that was Dr. Stewart's style. So I walked down the hallway of this center, and there were doors labeled research, education, library, and I was pretty impressed. And then a life-changing moment occurred. I met Dr. Stewart. He was standing in the hallway. He was fairly unkempt, as he usually was. He was wearing green scrubs. And over his right shoulder was a picture of the Brady Street Bridge being imploded. And I think most of you, some of you will remember that in Pittsburgh, an iron worker was working on tearing down this bridge. The bridge shifted and his leg got stuck. And Dr. Stewart coordinated the rescue that included a disarticulation of the worker's leg. So after chatting with Dr. Stewart for a little while, he said, why don't you come back on Saturday and we'll chat some more. And I was really looking forward to this, to learn about emergency medicine. And I showed up, but Dr. Stewart had other ideas. He met me with a paintbrush and a paint can, and we spent the whole day painting the Center for Emergency Medicine. And it sounds like other people had the same experience. I had the opportunity to peek in these rooms that had the fancy names, and they were empty. Some of them were filled with trash, just chairs. And I said, oh, this emergency medicine thing is not really working out for me. But I would eventually come to know that Dr. Stewart had a grand scheme. And that grand scheme was actually outlined on those doors. And he eventually would fill those offices and meet his grand scheme. Dr. Stewart promised me that he would have emergency medicine residency up and running by the time I graduated from medical school, and he did. Dr. Stewart had a really unique style of education. He would ask your opinion on something. He would let you go on about your opinion. He would praise your opinion, praise your knowledge and your insight, and then he'd come up with an alternative theory. And he worked some kind of magic on you, and after 5 minutes, you would agree totally with him, and he made you think that it was your idea in the first place. I don't know how he did that. Dr. Stewart became part of all of our families. He knew all of our spouses, our children, and would always ask how they were. He was everybody's Uncle Ronnie. When we learned he was leaving Pittsburgh to return to Canada, we were all devastated. How could this Center for Emergency Medicine survive? How could I survive without him? He was my mentor and one of my best friends. I didn't know at the time this is one of his grand schemes. Dr. Stewart had chartered a course for both me and the Center for Emergency Medicine. And he gave us a map and a compass and showed us the way forward. I really have to thank Dr. Stewart and also Dr. Paris, because the past 40 years in emergency medicine have been such an incredible ride and well beyond my wildest dreams. One last thing, as we heard, Dr. Stewart was the medical consultant for my favorite TV show, Emergency. In his memoirs, Dr. Stewart writes that the character of my original mentor, Dr. Kelly Brackett, modeled after him. Well, I think that was a long stretch, but it certainly does close the circle of my academic life. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Ron, for sharing that. Thanks so much. That's appreciate you sharing that sort of experience, impact with you, and obviously the team in Pittsburgh, because of the work that was done foundational, that is what Pittsburgh has evolved today as a great academic center with a lot of consequential work in our space. So let's bring Tim into this conversation. So Tim, what do you want to share?
Well, I want to repeat what other people have said and just really appreciate being included in this. There's a lot of people that could be here talking, and it's quite an honor to be included. Ron, I got to remind you that you and I go back 50 years. We were undergraduates together at Penn State. So our careers have sort of paralleled themselves. I was a year ahead of Ron and at Penn State and then at University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine, and we went through residency together. And if you buy Ron's memoirs, there's some more about Ron and I that I will leave to the reader. So I was in the first class at the of emergency medicine residence at the University of Pittsburgh. And what I want to talk about is just the first time I met Ron, because like Beck said, it was absolutely a life-changing episode for me. Completely changed the direction of my life. The first time I ever heard of Ron was through a high school friend of mine who had just come on board as a Pittsburgh paramedic. And he told me that the city had just hired this hotshot out of LA. And we all knew the TV show. I mean, we all watched the TV show. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. Within 2 or 3 weeks of Ron getting to Pittsburgh was when this event occurred on the Brady Street Bridge. I was, I think, second year medical school. And the word just went through the medical school like wildfire that there were these two doctors that went to the top of the Brady Street Bridge and took this guy's leg off to save his life. And, my first reaction was, my God, that's really cool. I mean, how amazing is that? And then I'm thinking, who are these people who would have the wherewithal, you know, to pull the trigger on a decision like that? And then I started thinking, can I ever get there? Can I ever be somebody that has those skills and that ability that I could function in any kind of reasonable manner in that kind of a situation? And so, boy, that really stuck with me. And as I went through my rotations, I kept coming back to, emergency medicine held a lot of appeal to me. It was still a new specialty. Um, and its future was anything but certain. But I really thought, I want those skills. I want to be able to do what these people do. And the only person to talk about it would be Ron Stewart. There was nobody else at the University of Pittsburgh. So I went to his secretary. I found the center, as Ron described, and made an appointment to see Ron. So on that day, I showed up, and Janet took me into his office, and it was just like a bomb had gone off. There were just stacks of journals and papers everywhere, nowhere to sit. There were mannequins and parts of mannequins and bag valve masks and endotracheal tubes in them. And I'm looking around thinking, I bet he likes to tinker. And Janet cleared off a chair for me and sat down. And surprises, Ron was late. Um, and I heard the doors open to the center, and it kind of came in like a cyclone. And that's the first time I ever laid eyes on him. And for people that have never met him, the best I can describe him is Doc Brown from Back to the Future. Just kind of, um, except for the wild hair. Ron didn't have hair, but he had that same just boundless energy and enthusiasm, in this positive energy that he brought with him. So he comes through the door like that, and he's wearing the scrubs, and he's got the white coat on, and it's kind of tailing behind him, almost like a cape as he's walking real fast. And Janet said, "You have a 2 o'clock appointment with a medical student." And Ron stops and he goes, "Yes, yes." And like he remembered, but I know now he completely forgot, and he just happened to walk in at the right time. But so he comes in the room, and he's got to clear off a seat for himself. And what I'll never forget, he pulls the chair up and gets right across from me. He doesn't get behind his desk, gets right across from me, and instantly he shut out the world. And for the next 15 to 20 minutes, there was nothing more important to him than helping me. He was totally focused on what my questions were. And, I don't think anybody in a position of, a mentor or a, teacher or anything like it ever quite came across like that they, uh, in a guy who had so many thoughts going through his head at once. It became more impressive to me as the years went by to think back at that moment and know what his train of thought was probably like, and to know he could focus like that on somebody. And I walked out the door knowing what it is I needed to do to get where I wanted to go. One thing was to hitch myself to this train, because this dude, he told me, "Yeah, well, I'm going to have a residency by the time you graduate." I was somewhat skeptical, but within a few months, he's like, "Yeah, we're doing it." And I was fortunate enough to be one of the first guys in the class, and it was quite a ride. Training under him was absolutely the highlight of my career. It was just really amazing. And I think of all these accomplishments that we're going to hear about, I mean, that'd be impressive for any 3 or 4 other people to accomplish, and just for one guy to do it. But that's not how I think of Ron. It's just his humanity, his ability to just really communicate compassion to other people. When you were with him, you were his best friend. You were the most important person to him at that time because you were the person with him. And his whole career was that of public service. It was to make the lives better of the general public, but also of his colleagues, his paramedics, and his friends. And those of us who are blessed to be his friends, it just is, it's been wonderful. And I would like to just close with another bridge story, and I might need to read this because other times I try to tell this story, I end up getting really emotional. So please bear with me. Everybody in Pittsburgh will remember that Ron literally lived at work. He didn't have an apartment. He had a house that he was never in, and he slept in his office, or in a dorm room upstairs, and which meant that he ate, a couple times a day at least in the hospital cafeteria. And I'd once in a while go grab lunch or dinner with him in the hospital cafeteria, and Ron just had this banter back and forth with everybody. People are serving his food, and he was there all the time, so people knew him. But a few years after I left Pittsburgh, there was another bridge incident involving Ron, and it basically a 911 call went out, and it was a jumper. And the police and the paramedics get there, and this guy will not talk to anybody, except he said he would talk to Ron Stewart. And it turns out he was one of the kids who worked the cafeteria line. Excuse me. But Ron was that one person in that kid's life who treated him with kindness. And, Ron came out to the bridge and talked him down. So thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Tim, for sharing that story. Obviously, better speaks about Ron's sort of compassion, empathy, character. Thanks so much for sharing that. I know that is very difficult for you. Before I go to Walt, I know if thanks so much for all the engagement in the chat. It's fantastic. Lots of questions. We'll get to those as we go. Walt, can you just share a little bit from your perspective about Ron and
Sure.
the impact he's had in your sort of life, but also in your professional journey?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for having us. Thanks for Prodigy and NAEMSP for putting us on, and thanks for the hundreds of folks that are here for this. How I met Ron, I was a street medic in the city of Pittsburgh, and Ron came to Pittsburgh to be our medical director. And I met with him, and I explained to him my life plan, and he bought it. And everything that I've achieved in my professional life can be and should be accredited to Ron Stewart's willingness to allow me to ride on the coattails of his long white coat. I wouldn't change a thing about my life, especially my 10 years with Ron and the extraordinary achievements that
Sounds like we're Walt, if you're
uh,
here.
I think you're
I
frozen.
I think Walt, you're
was
frozen, so that's okay. We'll come back to you, Walt, in a second. Before I go there, obviously, to my dear friends and colleagues from
able
Pittsburgh,
to accomplish during my
oh,
10 years of the master. As a little twist on what I'm going to talk about for my 5 minutes. Am I okay now?
I can hear you now. You there, Walt?
Okay,
Perfect.
I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you.
Oh, wonderful. I'm not sure I got cut off, but I'm just going to pick up here. 1978, Ron created the Disney World of EMS and EM. And just like Walt Disney, Ron was a visionary and a futurist. He found a piece of real estate that was already discussed about the dormitory just across the street from the emergency department at Presby. And he basically just moved in and took it. Now, I'm going to allow you all to fact check me later on who did these various comments from the lessons. But lesson number 1 was better to beg for forgiveness than seek permission. So Ron just moved into the real estate and took it over from the senior vice chancellor, and they just let him do it. So that was a great lesson to start with. And in this new magic kingdom called the Center for Emergency Medicine, also referred to as CEM or the Center, and other official documents will also add to it, the of Western Pennsylvania. But to those of us who were there from the very beginning, it will always be the Center for Emergency Medicine that's known nationally and internationally as the home of EM and EMS efforts. And as mentioned by Ron, that, painted the EKG down the hallway and placed titles on them like Office of Education and Research. And lesson number 2 then was put your dreams out there and others will latch on it and enjoy the ride. And I did. And as a paramedic for the city of Pittsburgh and as a student at the University of Pittsburgh, working on a bachelor's degree at the time in the School of Health Rehab Sciences, that I had an office at the center for the magical journey and was put alongside other individuals that became unbelievable friends, colleagues, and lifelong mentors. But the greatest mentor of all was Ron. In July of '81, Ron had me depart the streets as a medic and join the others that he had gathered in the magic kingdom of EM and EMS at the center. And the initial amusement park in this kingdom was basically an education domain that he put me in charge of, a research domain, the residency program that you've heard that several folks got into, and STAT, an acronym for specialized treatment and transportation, additional areas that would grow out of that foundation in the time to follow. Therefore, lesson 3, fish for whales and fishing for trout requires the same amount of time and effort. So go for the whales. So, but Ron would tell me as well, fish for some trout because I still needed to learn how to do it. But then later on, I would just always fish for whales. Prior to officially joining CEM, Ron thought it best to see other systems. So he bought a plane ticket, gave it to me, sent me to California for about 10 days, had me ride with LA City, LA County, Burbank, Long Beach. I stayed in firehouses and I got passed around. I was never in a hotel. I just went from system to system. And this was Ron thinking I just needed to experience something else and know that there wasn't just Pittsburgh EMS, a third service. There were others. This is lesson number 4. Actually, it's Peter Saffer's, and it's up to us to save the world. And Ron needed to start with me in the United States. And after that, I did. And Peter Saffer, with me and Sam, I accomplished what he wanted as well and tried to go out to the world as well. I knew I was working with and not working for a genius, Ron Stewart. I was in the center as Ron was reading French, typing in English at about 100 words a minute, and telling me how to go back in the back and process codolith film in great detail. So the man just was unique in so many ways. Ron also, the important thing was Ron recognized I was a work in progress, and it would take him years to develop what needed to be done with me. But it paid off for me and for Ron as well. And reflecting on Ron and the number of individuals he mentored results in staggering numbers of those obtaining knowledge and skills that had the significant impact on healthcare. Thus, lesson number 5. There are many mentors out there. Find them, use them. Few specific areas. Teaching. My bachelor's and master's were dual concentration in education and administration, and my doctorate degree was in education. And all of that education, my greatest education in education and in teaching took place from watching Ron Stewart. He was a natural. Quick story about Grand Rounds and what I learned and what I always teach in my instructor courses. Ron would sit in the front row with a notepad, just writing away, looking at you, talking. And those of you that presented Ron would know. He would just sit there and look at you and nod, giving you affirmation, just urging you to go on. I would look over his notes. He's writing down an outline for some book or doing something else, but he had developed a habit to just be able to look like he's paying attention to you. And so not only like Tim and the others were talking about, he was there for you, but maybe he was thinking of something else. Lesson 6, to teach is to learn twice. Writing. Paul Paris will tell you, my ability to write in my early days was unbelievably bad. And either typed on that Selectra typewriter or just hand wrote notes, of which I would leave for Ron. He would bleed and read over them overnight, and I would get him back and sort them out the next day. Lesson 7, do something worthy of being written about or write something worthy of being read. Get Ron's book. It is worthy of being read. Interactions with others. Ron would drag me to meetings with the most high-ranking individuals at the university and UPMC. I just would sit there quietly and pay attention. Lesson 8, it's Covey. Seek first to understand, then be understood. And Ron did that before Covey ever wrote it. A spinoff of that was networking. Ron was great. All of you know, he knew how to work a room. From the moment he went in, he was shaking hands and finding out everything was going on. I would imagine some of you here on the panel know, though, one of his real secrets is having us around where he would whisper in your ear, who was that over there? And I'd go, that's Tim Vollmer. And he would go up to Tim and go, Tim Vollmer, how are you? So he was usually pretty good with names, but just in case, he had a backup plan. And I learned from that as well. I use my wife to do that these days more often than not. Lesson 9. If you fail to plan to fail. And Ron planned to succeed all the time. Vacations. Early on, Becky and I went to Nova Scotia and spent time with Ron touring Cape Breton. And Wendy, our administrative assistant, was with us. And we actually went camping. You haven't lived till you've gone camping with Ron, where he takes all the food, dumps it in his backpack. You get all the way back in the woods in a canoe, and the directions on the package you pull out says, see the box, which Ron had already thrown away back where we went in. Lesson 10, take time to smell the roses. Organizations. From our initial Magic Kingdom at Pittsburgh in '78 with Ron, we created so much more. Ron with NAEMSP as an example, and me copying Ron and creating the National Association of VMS Educators. Lesson 11, from a single seed in time, many flowers will bloom. Ron's impact on healthcare. Lesson 12, the greatest legacy one can leave is a life that touches others. It's anonymous, but that was Ron. Just another 2 lines and I am done. And that is, this is the time to read the poem of The Dash. It's usually one read at funerals. Don't have time to do it here. Pull it up, just The Dash. And you'll, I think, hopefully enjoy how it reads. And finally, from Mark Twain, the 2 important dates. The date you were born and the date you find out why. We know when Ron was born and we know why. And we all had a wonderful time spending our little parts of time with him. Those of us in the Magic Kingdom, the branching of those various Magic Kingdoms. And I want to thank you all that have attended, and those of you here on the panel, Prodigy and NAEMSP as well. Thank you all very much.
Wow, Wolf, that's very powerful. Thanks so much for those sort of snippets of value, sort of information, but also reminders of having a purpose and how do you apply those in your journey. Powerful. We're gonna definitely want to get your writing and share that more broadly. That was very powerful. Thanks so much. I know we're very close to 3, but we are gonna be here until we don't have to stop at 3. Paul, let's go to you and share a little about Ron. And one of the things that I'm noticing a lot in questions and comments is sort of people's intrigue about sort of how the lots of history in EMS in Pittsburgh. and lots of and how the sort of that history connected. Like, people talk about Peter Safar, the Freedom House, and Ron. And I don't know if between you and Greg, maybe there's a little bit of a sharing of how those come together.
Is my screen visible to everyone?
Yes, sir.
Or it says emergency?
No.
No.
Yet.
Okay. So I guess I couldn't share my screen. Okay. Now I guess I'll have to get back to where I was then. Okay. I did have some nice slides, but in any case, I'll try to just fill in since what other people to cover. So the road wasn't as smooth as you might think. Ron had this remarkable vision, but he kept it hidden pretty well. He was recruited to Pittsburgh in '78 to direct the Bureau of EMS, but that was it. It was a very traditional academic institute, and they wanted nothing to do with this specialty called emergency medicine. They didn't want to hear about residencies. They didn't want to hear about institutes. And so Ron just sort of kept it a little quiet. At that time, the University Hospital was run by second-year internal medicine residents. They were the attendings. 12 months of an internship, and you were now the attending at a university hospital. The radio would go off if there was an EMS call, and whatever resident, could be the psych resident, rotating ED, whoever was closest, would pick it up and give orders. And that's what Ron came to. And then the bridge incident really gave him local fame. And there's something for you all to learn from that, which is a little bit of publicity goes a long way to your political abilities and your academic abilities. So all of a sudden, Ron got a little bit of, he was a sort of local hero. So he could do some things. So he was living in a dormitory room, and as Walt suggested one night, he said to the janitor, "Can I borrow your keys?" He went downstairs. He found this empty wing of the building, and he just started having paramedics and people like Ron Roth painting it. Offices that did not exist, but he stole the space, but he was too kind for someone to approach and say, "Ron, we really didn't want that space for you." And then he got a letter saying sort of his budget was being eliminated. I said, "Ron, what are you going to do?" He said, "We're going to hire more people." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "It's time to expand." I said, "How do you do that?" He said, "We're just going to get all the hospitals in Pittsburgh to pay dues." Why would they do that? He said, "I'm going to give them the impression that if they want patients from EMS to come to their hospital, they're going to pay dues to the Center for Emergency Medicine." He did it, and they all paid. And so I was recruited to be the residency director and be really, more importantly, to be his co-conspirator in this vision that he had, that he was just starting to let a few people know about. But it was there the entire time. And he was so clever about just getting the support he needed when he needed it. So Ron knew that EMS needed a scientific basis. The first couple NAEMSP meetings, I wonder who was here on the call, but anyone was at the first couple. They were less than anecdotal. They were having someone come up and just espouse whatever they wanted about what they did in their space. "Oh, we do crikes. Yeah, we did 120 crikes last year, and I don't think we killed anybody, and it seems like a reasonable thing." I mean, I'm being serious. There was no scientific basis to the practice. And so Ron recognized that we really needed to be practicing a higher standard of care, and there needed to be some basis upon which to do it. So as Tim would know, and Ron, the residents were all required to do a research project. And most of them chose an EMS one. And we would then, on the night before the abstracts were due, it would be hectic at the center. Residents would be running around, people would be running around. And I would eventually, at about midnight, go to sleep. And I would come back in the morning, and these abstracts would be beautifully written with results that I kind of was unaware of where they came from. Some of them might have been hidden somewhere, and some, I think he just predicted what the results would be in his infinite wisdom. And a lot of them did get accepted, and then we did recruit people like Jim Menegazzi and Don Yealy, who really did things the proper way. And as Tim said, Ron was always tinkering. And so he thought there should be better equipment. And he had an idea for a better suction. He had an idea for a seat collar. The seat collars that were used back then, Doug, what was your first seat collar? It was that soft, mushy thing that was a joke. It was just to remind you kind of that something was on your neck. And Ron had this idea for plastic and two pieces and came together and really did immobilize. He had this idea for a jellyfish mask. He had the idea for the lighted stylet. I mean, someone else showed it to him, but a better lighted stylet. He had an idea for an airway wrap. He had an idea that nitrous oxide could be put in one tank with 50% nitrous and 50% oxygen. And all these ideas he gave away, and lots of people made fortunes because he didn't think about things like money or patents. He didn't care. That's not what he really cared about. And the emergency medicine residency, Ron had this Volvo. He co-signed a loan for a Volvo for a paramedic. It was yellow. And the paramedic stopped making payments. So Ron owned a yellow Volvo. And in Pittsburgh, it wasn't really great to have a non-USA made car, but whatever. Ron painted it white and said medical director. He would respond to the field. And then I thought, what a great idea to respond to the field on the critical calls. And so we had the residents. The second year, I said, Ron, wouldn't it be great to have the residents do what you do and go to the field to the critical calls? He said, that is a great idea. Go ahead and do it, but do not tell anyone. Do not ask permission. And that's what we did. Like, you would never be able to do that today. I don't think that many places would, with liability, allow that you have residents driving an emergency vehicle. And I can't even remember. Ron, did we give you an evac course? Maybe we do now. But what was your training in driving?
None. And I couldn't drive a stick. I couldn't drive a stick shift.
In any case, but Ron lived in his dormitory room, and his life was his work. He had parents. His father died, and then later his mother. He had a sister, but his real family was every single person he worked with, every single person he met, the people in this room, the cafeteria worker that Tim talked about. That was his family. That was his life. He didn't have he had like a few outside interests. He would make you go see Gilbert and Sullivan, with him once in a while. But he didn't have a lot. He was just thinking of better ways to do things, how to make the world a better place, how to expand what EMS was doing, how to take what we do in hospitals, be able to give drugs like ketamine. People thought he was nuts when he said we should be giving ketamine in the field. They literally really thought that was the craziest idea he ever had. But his humility is reflected in his recently published memoir titled Treat Them Where They Lie, in which he says, I claim only a small measure of credit for the educational and academic infrastructure that was built up in the Pittsburgh area. Au contraire. Ron, the Johnny Appleseed of EMS, was responsible for the careers of countless individuals, many who stayed in Pittsburgh and built a dynamic, prestigious Department of Emergency Medicine. Many others who were recruited to Pittsburgh even after he left because they wanted to come to the home that Ron built. And others left Pittsburgh to spread the seed and build their own remarkable EMS careers, systems, and institutes. And like so many, to me, he was a friend, father, brother, mentor, partner in crime, Uncle Ronnie to my children. And Ron's vision, work ethic, personality, commitment, charm, intellect, empathy, altruism, all melded to create perhaps the most loved and cherished and accomplished physician in the history of EMS.
Thank you, Paul. Wow, that's a story to kind of process there. Thanks so much for sharing that, Paul. Greg, let's go to you.
Well, it is an honor to be here with so many of you to pay tribute to our friend and mentor. It's particularly difficult to follow all of you, but I thought I'd try to reflect a little bit on Ron's extraordinary life. When you think about Ron Stewart, it becomes immediately apparent that his journey was one of reinvention, transformation, and constantly striving for greater impact. But it was all in the service of creating a better world. Now, I live in Washington, D.C. now, and I am surrounded by people who are forever seeking more attention, more power, and more influence. But Ron was totally different in the way that he approached his greater impact, because there was always the most sincere desire to make the world a better place. And he did everything that he did with such kindness, humility, and selflessness, and a service ethic that is so rarely seen. Now, I first met Dr. Stewart when he was the medical director of my paramedic class, and I have to say, he taught a lot of our classes. And many people here have said what a master educator he was, and he was a role model for all of us in really every single way. I still remember that oxygen is good, blue is bad, and air has to go in and out. These three rules were enormously sophisticated in their grounding in anatomy, physiology, and pathophysiology, but they're so elegantly simple and utterly rememberable. Those three rules saved my ass many times as a paramedic, and they're emblematic of Ron's gift for conveying a lot of information in an understandable and rememberable way. Now, I was privileged to have an opportunity to go to work at the Center for Emergency Medicine, which was life-changing in a lot of ways. I had the opportunity to meet my future wife that are friends with many of you, and she's with us today, Mary Kay. That, of course, was a highlight of my time there. But I also, that is where I really got an opportunity to get to know Dr. Stewart in a different way. Because for some reason, he took a little bit of an interest in me. And I remember many times that he would come into my office, usually very late at night, because I ran the paramedic program at that time and worked late. And he would just sit in my office and we would just talk. And in those conversations, Dr. Stewart became Ron. And Ron, along with Walt and Paul, who you talked or heard earlier, were the ones that encouraged me to continue my education, for which I'm eternally grateful. I followed Ron's advice and I did my master's. I actually did my master's thesis on the trach light, so that Paul mentioned. So in many ways, I've been a Ron Stewart disciple for many years. And Ron and I stayed in contact through the years. And I must admit that I was very surprised when the master clinician, educator, and researcher entered politics in Nova Scotia. He loved being an MP and a minister of health, and he told great stories about some of his successes and hilarious ones about some of his missteps. But I really always struggled to understand why somebody with such prodigious intellect and talents would waste them on policy work. But then we saw the system-level transformation that he was able to achieve in his beloved Nova Scotia. He was able to leverage his talent, intellect, and communication skills to help people see and even to realize a vision for the future that they had previously not even imagined. Now, Ron was fond of quotes, for any of you that had a chance to work with him. And one of them that he often used was that politics and policy are the practice of medicine on a grand scale. And Ron was one of the ones who encouraged me to apply to a policy fellowship because he told me that we needed more paramedics in policy roles. He supported me. He reviewed my application. He coached me before the interviews, and I became the first paramedic that was awarded a Robert Wood Johnson Health Policy Fellowship. And I got a chance to work on Capitol Hill, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and even the White House. And in those capacities, I was able to bring a paramedic perspective to policy deliberations. And certainly my impact is nothing in comparison, but it was really an honor to be able to think about adding that perspective to policy deliberations. And none of that would have been possible were it not for Ron's mentorship, support, encouragement, and constant friendship. Now, Ron was fond of all literature, not just quotes. And I still remember my paramedic graduation, where he recited a poem. Some of you may have heard this before because he was often fond of it, but I think it's particularly appropriate today. "Come to the edge," he said. "We can't. We are afraid," they responded. "Come to the edge," he said. "We can't. We will fall," they responded. "Come to the edge," he said. And so they came, and he pushed them, and they flew. So thank you, Ron, for being a shining example of the impact through service to others. You pushed us all to fly beyond what we thought was possible, and the world is, in fact, a better place because of you.
Wow. Well, thank you, Greg. And one of the things that I was reflecting, hearing all of you sort of experience and the impact Ron has had in your not only personal but professional careers, is I want to remind not only folks here that are attending the webinar, but that may see it in the future, is you may have seen that NAEMSP, the highest award that we have in our association is the Ron Stewart Award. And it's because it is meant to be that recognition for lifetime achievement for a member in our community, in our specialty, in our industry. And when we hear about this profound impact that Ron has had in many trainees, clinicians, colleagues, it is because it is meant to be a lifetime achievement. Sort of, it is that high order of recognition. So thanks so much for sharing that, Greg. Let me go to Doug, our incoming president elect for NAEMSP. And Doug, do you want to share a little bit from your perspective?
Wow. Yeah, I know we are over time, and I thank all of those. I'm watching the numbers. It's like people aren't falling off, which is amazing that people are staying on to honor Ron and hear the rest of this. But you know, I feel a little bit like the kid at the Thanksgiving table in the kids' table watching this panel of people, because honestly, all of these people impacted by Ron have had some mentoring connection to me and some impact on me. And Greg, maybe you and I are sitting at that table because I found out just a few months ago that you and I graduated from high school the same year on opposite sides of Pittsburgh. But otherwise, like this whole entire group, you know, has had a great impact on me and my profession. And I think that, you know, it's pretty clear that a lot of that was funneled through Ron. I first met Ron in 1984, and two people alluded to it, and I really didn't think anybody was going to particularly say anything about it. But I was a paramedic in Indiana County, about an hour from Pittsburgh, a little over an hour from Pittsburgh. And I'm a paramedic, and they called us we had this special CME event, and this guy named Ron Stewart was coming to teach us about airway care, and particularly the lighted stylet, the trach light. And in my career, in my early days, I did a bunch of intubations with the trach light because of Ron. But I first met him in that scenario where he came to this, you know, rural county in Pennsylvania and was teaching paramedics, even outside and beyond Pittsburgh, airway skills. I was very honored to have last year the incredible opportunity to spend a couple hours doing some video recording with Ron for the 40th anniversary of NAEMSP, and how poignant it is that you know, that we now have a lot of that video. Many people have alluded to this, but my if I had to sum up in one story what Ron meant, I think he had an amazing gift because he was the kind of person that would meet you and there could be a long period of time between where you first met him and you might have been, just someone among a whole bunch of people that were passing by his radar. And then years later, you could meet him and he would pick the story up right from where it left off. He remembered things about you and remembered things about that encounter. And, through my career, I've had several times where, it's been like lunch at ASAP with Ron, where it's like, oh, what are you doing? Let's go for lunch. And suddenly you're the only person there with him. And he is just focusing on you and such incredible experiences. And, there is really only one other person that I can recall in my life ever running into that was just like that. And that was Jim Page, who actually certainly has connection to Ron Roth. But, that same kind of, he'd meet thousands and thousands of people and then would be able to instantly connect when he saw you again. So I do want to bring up one story that I did tell at NAEMSP last year, but for this audience, which is a bit of a different audience, one of the most interesting stories that I heard from Ron was related to when he first became Minister of Health. And, he was elected in at a time where there was controversy. And he was elected in, and right after he started, he had to do an inauguration or a cornerstone marking of a big new hospital. But it was controversial to even build the hospital. And Ron was stuck with having to do the grand opening of this as the newly elected person that's the Minister of Health. But there was controversy around it. So he knew that the Queen was going to be in town for another thing. And he invited the Queen to come to the grand opening of this hospital. And the Queen came and they did the unveiling of the cornerstone and, it went well and it got lots of press and that sort of thing. And then the Queen in the middle of the ceremony whispered to him, I hope this is helping you with your little problem. So, Ron knew even when he was in positions and, many people in leadership are in positions where, you're never the fan of everybody. Everybody doesn't view what you do or what's going on as perfect, but he could always spin it in such a way that he remained kind and he remained friends with everybody and just a spectacular way. So, Ron, we NAEMSP and EMS Medicine owes you a huge debt of gratitude. I think it is spectacular that the title of his book is Treat Them Where They Lie, because when you think about, for example, cardiac arrest care, where we went through the phases of lots of treatment to swoop and scoop, and now, much of the value of EMS is coming back to you need to treat them where they lie and not just try to stick them in an ambulance, get to the hospital quickly. And, that sums up Ron's memoir, but it also, is something that medicine has come back to and EMS has come back to. And, the other thing is, in my mind, EMS has never stopped making house calls. And Ron was one of those EMS physicians who got into the street and made house calls. So with that, Jose, I'm so happy to be part of this panel. I mean, from the kid that was in his pajamas watching Randy Mantooth on Emergency to help direct my career, it's such an honor to be on this panel with these incredible people.
Thank you so much, Doug. And I have a similar feeling of, in a way, it's a very special feeling because in a way I'm listening to sort of how all these stories connect to each other through one very special individual, in this case, Ron Stewart. But at the same time, a lot of people in this sort of call here today, because of their work, it actually made it all the way to where this young EMT in Puerto Rico decided to become an EMS and go to medical school and become an EMS physician. And that's me. So I actually also feel gratitude for all of you because in a way, indirectly, you influence you know, why some of us are here. So really, really grateful for the opportunity. We're obviously over time. We're gonna go now to share a little bit of with a video to close us off. But I want to say thank you, each one of you for being here and for our panel for taking the time to honor Dr. Ron Stewart and his legacy into our field and our practice and the impact he's had on many lives of many people. And grateful for all of you attending and listening. We have some questions. We'll try to get those in a different way, but let's just turn to this video to close out.
Well, I think I would tell anyone who wants to listen that the greatest privilege that they will have in their career will be to practice medicine or to practice our specialty and particularly medicine in general because it is a gift. This is a gift. This is, now I know at the end of, 12-hour shifts or something, we don't feel that particularly, but that's not what I'm saying. But for the most part, I hope that everyone listening to me or everyone that's within earshot will realize that I would want for them to be in my position where I'm looking back on 52 years of medical practice and say truthfully that I did my best. And if you can say that, and if you can mean it, then you've done much more than I think even you imagined you could do.
With that, amazing words. Thank you so much to Prodigy, our panelists, and very grateful. Those are powerful words. Thank you.